So our last video really covered the finishing of the model, the UV unwrapping. I spent an extra couple minutes because I had to do show that little fix for when the freeze transforms wasn't done on the actual troll body. You saw it kind of slightly distorts it like it did with the automatic mapping. So remember, that's why these things like freezing transforms, deleting history are quite important. But even like the labeling stuff's useful. Now the nice thing is, really all we're going to do is just take this into Mudbox for a quick paint. Bring it back in here, light, render, put a quick floor in. So this video is going to go quite quick. So I'm just selecting the body because that's all we're painting. And we're going to go File, and we're going to send to Mudbox, send as new scene. And that's all we're sending is just the body, because that's the only thing we unwrapped. But you notice how that unwrapping was the standard unwrapping we've done before on a couple of our objects, right? We've gone through that process before. Planar, selecting our edge lip sphere seams, cutting the seams, running the unfold. And you notice when you get the transforms frozen and you get some good seams, the unfold tool does a great job of giving you a pretty good UV unwrap without much more. That's what's great about the UV unwrapping is once you get it down, it doesn't take long at all. All right. Some UVs are too close together. We'll just keep all. All right. It's just letting me know that there's kind of some seams here on the center, and that's fine for this model because we just wanted to keep it as simple as possible, so we mirrored it over. So your textures are going to be identical on both sides because the UVs are on top of each other in Maya. So if I was to open up Maya again, it's a full body, but if we go to UV editing, it's the same UVs on both sides, right? So if I was to go here and select that shell, right, there are actually two sets of UVs on top of each other. So what that error was doing was just saying that maybe they're a little close here and here. If you want, you can space those out a little bit more before you move it over there. This is just a quick throw together, so don't sweat it too much. All right, so I'm gonna go back to my classic. All right, and I'm gonna open Mudbox. Now remember, the blue dot, or the red dots, I'm not colorblind. The red dots, remember, if you go to display, you can just turn mesh errors off, right? And there we go. Now in this case, all we really need to do is just do some simple color painting, right? So in this case, we're already in the paint area. We can go to Object List, select the body, right? And then we can always just kind of go back to Layer and click on the 3 white pages right there, New Layer. 4096 should be fine. If you want to do 2048, that's fine too. Diffuse is what we want, so you can just kind of use the basic defaults if you want to, whatever the defaults are. I'll leave it at 4096, but not a big deal if yours is 2048. So basically the defaults, hit OK, and there's our color layer. Now remember, we don't like seeing the yellow, so we go to Edit, Deselect All. All right, Control D. And with the paintbrush on, right, I'm going to click on the paintbrush down here in the Paint Tools. I'm going to make sure to turn Use Stamp Image off because we don't want to worry about that. Stamp spacing probably off too. In this case, I'm going to go to Color, and trolls are usually green, so I'll kind of pick like a darker green here, like that. Somebody just can click on that and pick your color. I'm going to scroll down, right? Remember, because there's this little slider bar, and we can flood paint layer, right? That's one of those things we always do with any layer, but in particular, we really want this guy to be green. Now, here's the thing, though. I don't really want it to be just one solid color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my strength for this brush much lower, at like, say, 10, right? Maybe even 5. I'm going to go to color, and I'm going to pick a much lighter green, right? And what this is going to allow me to do is come in here really quickly. Remember, you can turn your brush size down as well if you don't want your brush to be quite as big as it is, right? Size, strength are right there. If you hold down B for brush and the left mouse drag, that makes it bigger or smaller. And what I can do is I can just go in here and paint. I feel like that strength can probably be a little higher, maybe 20, right? We're setting strength because that's opacity for this brush, right? So you see how we can kind of come in here and it paints a very subtle light green, and you can kind of build it up. If you have a slight seaming issue around the center, that's because of kind of the UVs being on top of each other there. You just need a little bit of painting over it. But like I said, don't worry about this. This is really much more about participation than this being like super perfect awesome, right? So you can see I'm really just kind of coming in here and just getting something a little bit more interesting than just a solid color, right? And oftentimes you'll have kind of lighter colors inside the legs. You'll have lighter colors inside the arms, right? Because one, sometimes that's how camouflaging works for animals, but also in general, weathering, right? You tend to have your outer arm, your upper arm, the top, tends to be more exposed to sunlight, right? So it's going to get a little more suntanned. So oftentimes your skin underneath is going to be a bit lighter. And this is all I'm really wanting to see you guys do for the texturing on this, right? Is just some simple base coloring, right? Just kind of come in here, you know, kind of just add a little bit of kind of lighter color to areas, just to kind of make it look a little bit more dynamic and interesting than just solid green everywhere, right? So this will just make it look a lot kind of more like a troll, like a living animal that's got some basic color variation, right? You can kind of get a little bit in the mouth and kind of the neck if you wanted to. Even a little bit kind of inside the ear, right? So you can kind of get a little bit inside the ear there. Maybe even kind of a little around the eyes. And if you wanted to take a run at it, you don't have to at all. Like if you just do this, that's pretty much it. But if you wanted to, you could go pick a much darker color, right? And you could bring that strength up a lot higher, maybe even make a new layer for it. And you could pick a stamp image with some stamp spacing, just like we did before, right? Some stamp like this with a good high stamp spacing, right? And that will allow you to just kind of add a little bit of freckling if you want to for kind of some coloring, right? So like I said, not requiring this, but if you really want to take a little bit extra time to do it, might be kind of neat to just throw a little bit of freckling on there, right? And it's kind of cool to get to see that that stamp can be useful and cool for freckling, right? Remember the stamp spacing is how far apart the stamps are. You can always turn the strength or color down. And that's all you really needed to do for the color map on this guy, right? If we go to UV view, you can see that there's the actual painting done based on the UVs. And you see how great 3D projection painting is because it just painted right over everything like there was no seams. So now I'm just going to right click on that color layer. You can always save this mudbox scene, but it's not much there, so I'm not going to worry about it. But it's up to you guys if you want to save it to work on it a little more. But remember, you right click on the layer and you just export selected. So the nice thing is this was really nothing new. We've done this stuff before, right? So I'm going to go to the Project 6 one, source images. We can call this body color, right? Underscore color. There we go. And now I've got that actually saved as a color map, right? So I'm going to minimize this, go back to Maya, right? And I'm going to hold down right mouse, right? I'm going to select the body. I'm going to hold down right mouse button, and I'm going to go assign new material, right? Now in this case, I'm not even going to worry about the Arnold standard surface, right? Because we're not really going to worry about shininess on this guy at all. I'm just going to put a new Lambert on, right? So if you want to use an Arnold standard surface, you can, but in this case, since it's just a simple color map, I'm just going to use a new Lambert, right? Just create a Lambert. Remember, if you hold down right mouse button, you can go to Material Attributes. There's that Lambert 1. These are the old materials. Lambert in particular still works fairly well with Arnold, but when you want to do anything that's not just no shininess, because you'll see there's no controls for shininess in a Lambert. So it can't do shininess or specularity, right? So in this case, I was just doing a simple Lambert 1 because just easier that way. Call this body, right? And you see there's a color tab right here, so we can click on checkerboard for color. And of course, it brings up this for file, right? And in this case, we can go to, that should have not done that. All right, let's double check, material attributes, checkerboard, file, there we go. And then we can go to folder, of course. There's our color map. Hit open, and there we go. Now, of course, remember 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is texture. And you said it went on pretty well. And since we didn't really need anything more complicated, we don't really need to worry about shininess on this troll, it's just a color map. Like I said, when I went to assign new material, I really just did a Lambert, right? I didn't go to the Arnold section to find Arnold standard surface. You can just kind of do the Maya Lambert if you want to. Make it a little easier for us. So I'll save that. Control, and I'm going to close Mudbox down because I don't need Mudbox open anymore. Don't save that. And now what I like to do is just a quick little ramp for this guy to stand on. So I'm just going to go to Create Polygon Primitives Plane, right? Give us a little floor. We hit R for scale to scale it up. I make it long this way because we want it to kind of cover the whole back. And then, of course, we can go to Vertex Selection, right? Hold down right mouse button, Vertex, and grab these vertices back here. And what we can do is we can start to move these up, right? Now I'm going to hit 3 because It's okay if this ramp's going to be in smooth preview for us when we render it. And I can select this edge loop right here. You see how I basically just shaped a half pipe, right? That's all I really did. It just gives us kind of a nice, easy, kind of little kind of floor with a really unobtrusive background for the character to stand on, right? So I like this ramp because by having it kind of fade up in the background, you get a really gradual faded background effect with this. All right, so now we've got a floor. And like I said, that was just create polygon perimeters plane, and then I did some shaping to it, right? That was all. I didn't add edge loops. I just scaled it a bit, pulled up some vertices and edge loops in the back to shape it. Did put it in smooth preview, so I got it rounded. That's it, right? So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. Maybe hit F to frame selection for the body. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to start to put some lights in here, right? So I usually hit spacebar to kind of go to my 4 views. It's just a little easier. Remember 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded, and that works with each viewport independently of each other. And I just need to get a light or 2 in here just to kind of set up our rendering. So we're going to go to create lights, directional light. Now remember, this is going to be pretty small, so I'm going to make it a little bigger. And this time we're using a directional light instead of a spotlight because one, it's actually better at mimicking sunlight. Directional lights are good for sunlight, but also believe it or not, you see I'm kind of rotating it down, have it at a bit of an angle, so it'll be interesting kind of lighting for the character. But also they're just really easy to work with, right? You don't have to worry about cone angle or making the exposure nearly as high, right? They're a little easier to work with spotlights. All you have to do really is point them in the direction, that's it. So I've got a light in there. Now remember, I'm going to go to Arnold Render View, right? If you're not seeing Arnold here, remember that's just Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. And you can just scroll down until you see the Moda M2A solid angle one, and just tell those to load auto load. So I'm going to go to Arnold, open up Arnold Render View, right? Make sure to pick perspective shape, right? I'm going to go to Render, run IPR, right? And then I'll kind of take a minute to load in the texture. But there we go. We can already start to see we're getting some light in here. Now remember, with that light selected, you can go to your attribute editor here, and you can play with controls. Now you'll notice by default, the directional light actually shows up, where spotlight we had to adjust exposure. In this case, I still like using Arnold for this, so I open up the Arnold section, and I'll just bring the exposure up a little bit. So you see how directional lights are, by default are just a lot brighter when they come in than a spotlight is. That's one of the reasons why they're easier to work with. Now we do want the shadow to be softer at the edges, right? So that's where we turn angle up, right here. Sometimes you'll see it called radius in other lights, but that'll soften it, right? And if you wanted to, you could even play with shadow density to make the shadow a little bit more transparent, right? But shadows get softer as they go away from the object. Now you'll notice it could be a little bit brighter here, right? We're still getting some bounce light, but it could be a little brighter here. So I'm going to close this for a minute, and I'm going to put another light in here. I'm going to put another directional light in. So I'm going to create lights, directional light. Remember, lights are small when they come into Maya by default, so we'll just hit R for scale to scale it up. E for rotate, right? And you see this one I'm kind of leaving pointing directly at the side and maybe a little bit at the front, right? So now, of course, we can click in the perspective view again. Arnold, open up Arnold Render View, run IPR, spacebar is the quick key for that. And you see the light is much brighter in here because of this one now, right? So I can select this light again, that side light, right? And we could easily do a couple of things with this. One, we could actually bring the intensity down, right? In this case, exposure is already at 0, so in this case, we could play with intensity. But you see how that's without the light, and that's with the light at 1? So kind of, you can actually add your own fill lights in, right? That first light's our key light, right? It's casting shadows. In fact, if I was to rotate this light a little bit, you'd start to see it is casting a shadow also. We don't want that, right? So in this second light, which is going to be our fill light, turn cast shadows off, right? And you say you can actually tell shadows to not cast. In this case, I'm going to kind of rotate it back to the direction I was pointing. But I just wanted to highlight that it was actually casting a shadow. Remember, fill lights are less intense than key lights, right? Your key light's your main real light source. So that first directional light we put in, that's the key light, right? But we felt we could use a little bit of extra fill, a little bit of extra bounce. Arnold was already giving us some from the global illumination, but oftentimes you need a little bit to add it on your own. So in this case, we kind of put our own little fill light in, made it subtle. We don't want the intensity too much, and we did want to make sure to turn cast shadows off for that. And now you see we actually have some pretty good lighting and rendering for that. And that's what's great about our Arnold render view, right? It gives us that ability to just kind of adjust those and see what's happening in real time or close to real time with the rendering. But that's just our preview render, right? So what we do is we go to this little kind of like little clapboard with the eyeball right here. We click on that. And the Arnold render is already on, which is great. We'll go to Options in Render View, Render Settings, right? And Arnold render is already set up, so we're good there. We can just leave the defaults. But in the Common tab, I'll scroll down, and in this case, it's set to kind of the HD 540. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to set it to be kind of 1080 by 1080, right? Or if you really, really want to, and just make it easier, HD 1080. That does mean there will kind of be some dead space on this render, right? So when you go to click on it to render it, there will be some kind of areas on the sides that could be cropped, right? But this will be our final render. And fine tune it just to make sure that your light's the intensity you want. Make sure your character's pretty close in the shot, right? You see how I've kind of got it so that he's taking up as much space as he can in the final render. But remember, this is the actual kind of right here is the final render. It's actually doing a full render instead of an interactive, continually refining render. It is using Arnold, so that's why it looks identical. And when those blue boxes are done, you're done. You just go File, Save Image. Make sure Color Management is on, right? Make sure it's set to JPEG. And then you can just give us our normal naming convention, DAA, Intro to 3D Modeling, underscore 240. For you guys, you'll, put your class, right? Spring, right? Spring 20, underscore your name, and then underscore the project, project 6. There we go. And that is our final render and the troll all done. Now, one thing I want to make sure just to show you guys you don't even have to worry about it really, I just want to make sure to show it to you, but this is officially done for the lecture with the troll. There is another way to look at your outliner and your history, right? We know that in Channel Box Layer Editor, our objects, right, might have a history and transforms right through here. And we know outliner shows us our objects and any groups. There are other ways to see that, right? You don't really, it's kind of like the choice, really. But if you go to Windows, you'll see that there is an area called General Editors, and you have something called Hypergraph Hierarchy, right? And you'll notice what the hypergraph hierarchy really shows you is just your objects in the scene like this. And if they're grouped into something, right? So if I was to just kind of quickly group these, right? There's a group, right? How is this really any different than this? It's not. It's just a different way to look at it, but it's basically the same information, right? So that's what hypergraph hierarchy is. Now, in this case, if we had any modeling on something, probably not going to see much here, but there is something called Windows General Editor's Hypergraph Connections, and that'll show you any history that an object has. So if I was to go in here and maybe kind of add a few extra edge loops, right? You'll see as we kind of put some stuff in here, we'll start to see that there's poly splits right here, right? Now, you can see that for this object, they're all right there, all in order, top to bottom. You start to get crazy stuff and start to do some weird things, like if I was to kind of take a few polygons here and extrude those out, right? All of a sudden you'll start to see that your hypergraph connections can get really, really weird, right? But basically what Windows General Editor's hypergraph hierarchy and hypergraph connections is there are different ways to look at your history, right? The connections of any operations you've done on the object, basically your history, right? There's your poly splits. You can click on any one of those and it kind of brings up, the controls for it right there. But also the other one, the hypergraph hierarchy, right? Windows General Editor's Hypergraph hierarchy really just shows you kind of, it's like your outliner. It's like a different version of outliner. So I kind of find the outliner in history to be kind of more sensical and really easy to get access to on a regular basis. These are really just showing that information in a different way. But it's kind of one of those things on the checklist of things that I'm supposed to at least show you, right? So in Windows, General Editors, Hypergraph, and Hypergraph hierarchy and connections are there. Just like, you know, that blue guy right there, that little blue dot's your Hypershade. So any materials that are in here, you can click on them, right? Click there, see your maps plugged into the material itself right here. So like I said, this is just kind of a little bit of extra stuff that you guys don't have to worry about for your project, but I wanted to make sure to show you guys, right? So that'll be great.